looks like it stopped. All right, we're good. So a few other considerations that I think are important is that there's something that's called an RPE scale, also known as rate of perceived exertion. It's a very simple concept that we use a lot in health and fitness, especially among personal trainers. And all it really is this a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is I'm not working hard at all, and 10 is I'm dying, I gotta stop, this is too much. I really like this scale because I think it's tailored to everyone who uses it, right? I might say I'm working at a 7, you might say you're working at a 7. That might be different, but it's still what we perceive as that level of intensity. And this scale, I think, is really important for a few reasons. And the first one is that as we work to higher intensities of exercise, it becomes a lot more challenging to differentiate that good discomfort from exercise versus pain, because there's just a lot of stimulus going on when we're working that hard. And so if we're not careful with our intensity, we can actually experience some sort of pain and not even realize it because we're just working hard and there's adrenaline. That's a big reason why athletes won't notice injuries sometimes mid-game. That's because they're working at such high intensities and there's so much adrenaline pumping that they don't even feel it until it's too late and they've done a lot of damage. So what I usually suggest in terms of a recommended intensity is somewhere between 5 and 8. Let's say 5 for the average person is like a brisk walk, where 8 is like a run. I really strongly suggest that window because anything below a 5 and we're starting to have a hard time challenging ourselves enough to experience results. Again, exercise is stress, and we've got to make sure we put enough stress to get an adaptation or response. But also, I don't really suggest most people going above an 8 unless you have a lot of experience with exercise. And the reason for that is, like I said, it's really hard to differentiate the good from bad pain. And without a lot of experience with it, it can be really hard to decide which is which. And not only that, but when we're working at high intensity, it's harder to maintain form and to avoid fatigue. Fatigue can set on really fast. And when we're tired, it's a lot harder to control ourselves. So generally, I suggest is finding that 5 to 8 range is going to get you at an intensity that you're going to get results, but you're still able to differentiate the discomfort or the stress that your body is feeling while working out. And one last point I want to say with that before we move on is that any kind of discomfort or challenge that you feel with exercise should match your RPE, if that makes sense. So like, let's say that I'm at a 5 and I'm briskly walking. I shouldn't all of a sudden feel a discomfort that is an 8 or a 9. I shouldn't suddenly feel like I'm sprinting uphill if I'm just walking and then my heart starts racing and my temperature rises. That's not the same as like breaking a bone or something where it's sudden pain. But if it's a sudden spike in intensity out of nowhere, that might be a sign that something is wrong. We need to dial it down. So generally speaking, your RPE, your exertion should match the discomfort. And there shouldn't be a big disparity there. If you ever experience that, there's a pretty good sign that there might be some sort of injury or that something might be wrong. So just something to consider there. So to sum it up, I know you can't see my PowerPoint, but the saying no pain, no gain, myth busted. And the reason for that is because while some discomfort is normal, pain is not. There needs to be a very clear understanding of which is which. And I think that the saying no pain, no gain can really, it can kind of confuse people on what's an appropriate intensity to work out. It can also make it really intense just to get started. If you believe that you have to push yourself to exhaustion every single time you exercise to get any benefit, then that's going to be really demotivating. You're not going to want to do it as much. It's a lot more intimidating like that. So while discomfort is normal, pain is not. No pain, no gain, that's not true. We need to find a happy medium somewhere between. So before the next one, I'm going to try to leave some time at the end for questions in case you have any, but does anyone have any questions about that myth before we move on? All right, we'll keep going. So myth number 2, or belief number 2. If I don't get sore, then I didn't work hard enough. Definitely hear this one a lot. It's as if soreness is a direct result of how hard you worked out, or that if I don't feel sore, then I didn't do enough in my workout. It's a very common belief. I hear it a lot, even amongst fitness professionals. So let's talk about it. First off, when we're talking about soreness, I want to clarify we're talking about post-exercise muscle soreness, also known as DOMS, or delayed onset muscle soreness. That's the official term. But basically, it's muscle soreness that we experience after exercise. It lasts anywhere from 2 to 5 days is usually the typical range. It can be anywhere from mild, so just like a slight tightness, you just kind of feel it, to severe, where you feel like you can barely walk. So the exact cause of muscle soreness is not precisely known. If you ever heard someone say they know the exact cause, they don't, because there's a lot of inconclusive research deciding what exactly it is. What we think it is that it's the result of your muscle fibers quite literally tearing on a microscopic level when we exercise. So we're quite literally injuring our muscles on a small level in order to rebuild them stronger and better. What it's not, and what has been commonly taught for a long time, is it's not the result of a buildup of what's called lactic acid. Lactic acid is a byproduct of exercising our muscles, similar to like when we breathe in oxygen and we exhale carbon dioxide. Lactic acid is just a result of using our muscles. However, research has shown that there's actually no correlation there. So lactic acid doesn't cause soreness. We just think it's because of torn muscles on a small microscopic level. What we do know is that DOMS is actually related more so to the newness of an exercise than anything else. We know that muscle soreness is more intense and lasts longer when we're dealing with new forms of exercise, something that our bodies are not used to. That's why an elite athlete who works out 3 hours a day, 6 days a week, can go out and do yard work for 8 hours for the first time in years, and they're going to get just as sore as anyone else. And it's not because that exercise is more effective or anything like that. It's simply because it's some sort of activity that your body's not used to. And so as a result, we see more muscle soreness correlate with that. Also, the intensity and duration of that new exercise can affect how sore we get. So if you try a new exercise, I often suggest, don't go crazy with it, because then you might experience really intense soreness. And while intense soreness isn't necessarily a sign of injury or anything like that, I usually suggest that if you experience something that intense and that soreness doesn't go down after doing that workout several times, then we might want to dial down the intensity, because that might indicate that our body's not quite adapting to it like it should. So usually I suggest is that if you're getting just crazy sore, that's not necessarily a good thing. Maybe we should dial it back some. But again, that soreness is actually more related to the newness of an activity rather than how hard you worked. There really is no correlation at all between progress, results, and muscle soreness. So rather than saying, I'm only going to get results if I feel sore, start thinking of other ways that we can find out if our workout was effective. So for example, just a second, I'm sorry, I see a Q&A. Someone says it's slow motion. Is anyone else having technical difficulty seeing me? I'm hoping I'm not in slow motion for everyone. Okay. Hopefully it's gone back to normal for you, Rhonda. If not, okay, very good. We'll keep going. All right. So some other ways that we can determine the effectiveness of our workout rather than just how sore we are. One is quite simply making sure we're working in a RPE, so working between that 5 to 8 range. If you're working at that intensity, then you're going to get some benefit from it. Whether or not the benefits correlate with your goal depends on what you're doing, of course. But if we're working at an intensity that is challenging and that's putting that necessary stress on our body, we're going to get benefit from it, regardless of how sore we feel. And another way to help make sure that we're being effective is by actually tracking what we're doing. If you have a specific goal, then you should be really specific in your intentions. If you say you want to get stronger, but you never really track the exercises or the weights or the repetitions or anything like that, it can be really challenging to know if you're actually improving. The worst thing we can do is just base it off of how we feel that day. Like, oh, that felt really good. I must be seeing progress. Because the truth is that the way we feel changes daily and even hourly. It's a lot more effective if we're able to track it somewhere or another. Whether that's because you just got a photographic memory and keep up with it, or writing it down, whatever works for you. But really keeping track of your performance is a really good way of seeing that you're improving and that you're being effective in what you're doing. That is really going to be the most effective. So the myth, if I don't get sore, I didn't work hard enough, that is a myth. Myth busted. Muscle soreness is not a good indicator of effectiveness or progress. It's really just your body's way of saying, hey, this is something new. It heals from it, and then it moves on. So not a good example of progress, more so just generally something new for your body. All right. So any questions about that? I do see one question. Kevin asks, do you recommend working out through DOMS? And my suggestion to that is it really depends on your own comfort level with it. If you got soreness that's like just so crazy intense you can barely walk, sometimes it might happen by accident, right? You just work out a little too hard and you're sore. Then I would say don't do it. Give a few extra days to rest. But if it doesn't affect your workout at all, then you can go ahead and work out through soreness. There is no research to suggest that it can be detrimental to our body. As long as we're still getting rest, as long as we're still getting enough nutrition in our body to help refuel us and get through workouts, we're fine. Working out through soreness is totally fine. Again, it's just if it's too intense and it becomes uncomfortable, then I would suggest just skipping that day and letting yourself rest a little bit. Good question. Any other questions before we move on? Yes, RPE, so that is just rate of perceived effort. So it's a scale of just rating how hard you feel like you're working. Like I said, it's a bit arbitrary, but what's nice about it is it's custom to you. And what we've found is that as long as your perceived rate of effort is in that range, I said 5 to 8, then that means you're putting enough stress on your body that you're going to see benefit. So while it is arbitrary, it's a really effective scale, and it kind of helps keep ourselves in check. Even when I'm working out by myself, I'll be like, okay, how do I feel right now? Am I at a 5? Am I at an 8? Where am I at? And it's just a good way of keeping yourself in check and making sure you're staying at an appropriate intensity level. You'll hear a lot about recommended heart rate ranges and stuff like that. That's all fine, and I don't necessarily want to get into that, but RPE is really simple, and you don't need anything to track it. It's just quite literally, what intensity am I working out at this moment? And by using that scale, it just helps identify where you're at. Good question. All right, we'll go ahead and move on. So our next statement, let me pull my PowerPoint back up. Statement number 3, and that is, I need to stretch before I exercise. This is a big one. You hear it a lot. And I think the idea here is that stretching before an exercise is going to basically warm you up or prepare you, right? So what I'm going to do is first talk about warming up specifically, and then talk about stretching. So warming up is essential for exercise. I think pretty much everyone has heard that and agrees with that. That's pretty much just accepted. Everyone may not know why, but they know that they need to warm up. So first off, the reason that we warm up, one is for injury prevention. That one is probably the most well known, is that we want to prevent injury. Again, we may not know why, but we know that helps prevent. But one other thing that actually warming up does is it improves our performance when we're exercising. It's funny, I think the demographic of people that struggle the most with warming up, who just don't want to do it, is people really under 25. So like high school, college age, for whatever reason, they don't like warming up, especially males. I don't know why, but it's just like, oh, I don't want to do it. Maybe if we all knew that it actually helps improve our performance during working out, they might be more likely to do it. So here's the why. A proper warm-up, what it's doing for our body is, one, it increases our body temperature. And what that means is it also improves the elasticity or the stretchiness of our soft tissues, so our muscles and our tendons and ligaments to an extent. And that's really important because during exercise, there's a lot of motion around our joints. And so it's important that we have our muscles there to stretch a little bit and to absorb the impact of the movement. If we're really stiff, then we're much more likely to tear or break something. So elasticity is really important. If you ever did this experiment in middle school science, but if you take one rubber band and you have it at room temperature, or maybe it's out in the sun or under a lamp, you take another one, put it in the freezer, and then you compare how much they stretch after an hour in that condition, you'll notice that the warm one is much more stretchy, like it's very forgiving. While the cold one, it's not going to go very far before it snaps. And while that is a pretty extreme example, that is very similar to how our muscles and soft tissues are in our body. The warmer they are, the more forgiving they are with force and with stretching and moving. So body temperature and elasticity is really important. So making sure to get our heart rate up when we're warming out is crucial. Another good reason to warm up is that it increases our blood circulation. And that's good because we're able to transport energy to the muscles that we're working more quickly, and also getting rid of those byproducts that I talked about before, like lactic acid, getting that out of our system more quickly. And what that can mean is that we actually perform better as a result of having that blood circulation. So even if you're going to be doing like a resistance training workout that has nothing to do with cardio, still making sure to get your heart rate up beforehand is going to help you perform better by getting those nutrients to your muscles faster. And then lastly, another good reason to warm up is that it's going to help loosen and lubricate our joints. So all those three things, really important for exercise. They're all going to be beneficial, not just for preventing injury, but also for making sure that we perform better when we're actually working out. All right, so now let's talk a little bit more about the warm-up itself. So a typical warm-up should last anywhere from 5 to 20 minutes. Really 5 minutes at least, because that's just how much time it usually takes to get your heart rate up to appropriate level in a appropriate time frame. If you just start sprinting in place, yeah, you might get your heart rate up fast, but we also didn't get a chance to get our joints and tissues and everything else there as well, or get primed and ready to go. So usually 5 to 20. Usually longer warm-ups are better for more intense exercise. That's why you might see athletes will warm up sometimes for an hour, hour and a half. They have their own reasons. I'm not going to get into that. But really, the more intense that your exercise is going to be, the longer the warm-up is necessary. And again, usually at least 5 minutes. And also the length of the warm-up might just be dependent on what all you're doing. There are two components to a warm-up. One is the cardiovascular, right? We're trying to get our heart rate up. And the other part is dynamic stretching. This is going to help target those specific muscles and joints that we're working so that they're lubricated and that they're specifically warm enough to start working. The intensity of a warm-up should be light at the beginning and should really only get up to moderate intensity. It should never be more than like a 5 or a 6. At that point, we're just working out. So trying to keep that intensity fairly low, especially at the first part, and then kind of rev it up as you go. If you've ever taken like a group exercise class here at the rec center, you'll notice that's a lot of the ways how our warm-ups are. You're moving, you're stretching some, but we're kind of gearing up intensity. We're not just jumping right into it. It's a steady increase. That's a really important aspect of warming up. So that gets us to the stretching part of warming up. The type of stretching we should be doing is dynamic stretching. And basically dynamic stretching is flowing movements that are challenging the range of motion of our joints and our muscles while also being able to keep our heart rate elevated. Usually recommend that stretches during a warm-up are only 1 to 10 seconds long, really no longer than 15 seconds. If we start doing that any longer, we're starting to do what's called static stretching, which is something a lot different I'm going to talk about here in a bit. But we don't want to do that, because really what we're trying to do is we're just trying to warm everything up and prime it to exercise. We want to make sure that we're targeting the muscles that we're going to work out. So if I'm going to do a lower body workout, I want to make sure that any dynamic stretching I'm doing is going to be targeting those muscles. So for example, maybe I'll do some high knees, standing high knees, or I'll do a light jog in place. Maybe I'm doing some like small body weight squats to help go through that range of motion to target those muscles without it being super intense. And again, we're trying to just hit that range of motion that joint's going to be going through during the actual workout. That's the idea. My PowerPoint had some examples of dynamic stretches, but again, the main idea here is just that we're being dynamic and fluid with our motion, and that we're challenging that range of motion without stretching it for a long period of time. And the reason for that is that slow stretching or static stretching has completely different set of benefits. The primary purpose of static stretching is to quite literally stretch or lengthen our muscles. It's really beneficial if we have muscles that are tight or joints that are tight. So we want to stretch those muscles surrounding it. With the goal of static stretching is we're really trying to create a permanent increase in elasticity of that muscle. And so while that's really good, it can help improve our flexibility, our range of motion. It also helps to boost recovery after exercise. But there is a risk associated with static stretching. And it's specifically in that immediately after static stretching, that because that muscle is elongated, it's not as good as at protecting our joints when we're exercising. In other words, a big part of what our muscles do is it kind of keeps our joints in check. If we didn't have muscles here, it'd be really easy for our joints to go past a range of motion that's appropriate and pop something out of socket or crack something or whatever. Our muscles play a big role in keeping that together. And when we do a static stretch, we're kind of temporarily disabling the normal length of that muscle, and it's going to be stretched beyond what's normal for our body. And another reason, and this getting a little bit deeper into the science, but I love this, so I'm going to say it anyways, is that we have these little mechanisms in our muscles called Golgi tendon organs. They're GTOs. And what it is it's basically a little fail-safe in our muscle that whenever it detects a big stretch, it will immediately trigger your muscle to contract. And it's just a way of keeping your body from stretching past what it should and tearing itself. And what we've noticed is that during a static stretch, we're actually slightly triggering those GTOs and almost disabling them. They see that it's stretched and they're like, okay, nothing intense is happening. And because you're holding it for an extended period of time, it just kind of stops working. And it stops working for anywhere from 5, 10, 15 minutes. But what that means is that if you do a static stretch around a certain joint and then go through a very high intensity movement with it, it's going to be a lot harder for your muscles to control that range of motion. And you're very likely to accidentally go into a range of motion that's too much for your joint and hurt it. So that's a big reason we want to avoid static stretching before any kind of workout. The only time I would say that it could be appropriate is perhaps if you're stretching something that is extremely tight to a point that it's affecting your form. So for example, I have what's called a posterior pelvic tilt. And as a result, the back of my legs, my hamstrings are really, really tight. And if I don't do a little bit of static stretching before exercise, then it's really hard for me to maintain proper form during a squat. You could also stretch a muscle that maybe you're not going to actively work out during exercise. However, in general, I would say avoid any kind of static stretching right before a workout. It's not going to guarantee that you're going to hurt yourself. I'm sure a lot of people have been and will continue to do it, and they'll be okay. But you can kind of think about it as like driving 20 miles an hour without a seatbelt versus driving 120 miles an hour blindfolded. Is a lot more dangerous. You might be okay, but there's a lot bigger chance that you might not be okay. So I would suggest avoid any kind of extensive static stretching before exercise, and instead focus primarily on dynamic, quick stretches and just warming up your body as a whole. So the phrase, should I stretch before exercise? I'm going to confirm it. It is not a myth. It is true. But what we do need to understand is making sure we're doing the right kind of warm-up, and that is dynamic stretching and making sure our heart rate is getting elevated. Static stretching, mostly want to avoid before exercise. Any questions before I move on? Looks like we're good. Again, I'm going to try to save a few minutes at the end, so if you do have a question, I'll be more than happy to answer it. And of course, if one comes up, you can just pop it in there, and I'll be happy to answer. All right, so we're going to move on to the next one. This is my favorite one, and it is the phrase, lifting weights will make me bulky. The reason this one's my favorite is I would say that probably 90% of the clients that I've worked with, dozens and dozens of clients, one of the first things they'll tell me when we're talking about goals and what they accomplish is they're really worried about getting big and bulky because lifting weights. And a lot of them will completely avoid resistance training because of that. So let's dive into it. And the first thing I want to talk about is really specifically what is resistance training. Resistance training is a form of exercise that focuses on muscular fitness, specifically on our muscles. So while cardiovascular exercise focusing on our heart and our lungs primarily, resistance training is focusing on our muscles. And usually the outcomes are going to be one of four things. One is going to be improving strength, so quite literally just how much weight we can move. It could also be increasing power. Power is not really important for most people. It's mostly for athletes, but it's basically strength and speed combined, so doing things quickly. There's also hypertrophy, which is literally just building muscle. And then there's muscular endurance, or just stamina of our muscles. I really want to highlight two of them, and that's going to be strength and hypertrophy. I think a lot of people think that the way that we get stronger is by creating bigger muscles, but that's actually not true. While bigger muscles do make us stronger, we can absolutely build strength without building muscle. In fact, it's very, very normal to become stronger without actually building any muscle. Now, I will say that resistance training is necessary in order to build muscle. You can't just get big and bulky and look like a bodybuilder. I'm sad you can't see my PowerPoint because I have a picture of this big bodybuilder. It is necessary to do resistance training in order to build muscle, but doing resistance training isn't necessarily going to make you build muscle. In order to achieve big muscles, lifting weights is required. And the only reason I kind of separate resistance training from lifting weights is that resistance training is really any kind of resistance that you're working against with your muscles, right? So doing a body weight squat or a plank or a push-up, that's resistance training, even though it's not lifting weights. For most people to get really big and bulky, they usually do have to use weights, not just body weight. It is technically possible, but it is a lot more challenging to get a huge, big, muscular physique just from doing body weight. So lifting weights is a necessary part of that. And I think that because those individuals who look like that do lifting weights, that we say, oh, well, if I do that too, I will look like that. However, achieving a lot of muscular growth, it requires a mixture of several things. First off is going to be the workout itself, right? There's definitely a specific kind of training style surrounding building muscle. It's going to be very high volume. A lot of times you're targeting just like one muscle at a time and you're hitting it really hard. So there is purposeful training. There's also a very big nutritional aspect of it. And there's also a big part that hormones play in exercise and building muscle. If you don't quite have the right amount of hormones in your body, it's very challenging and nearly impossible to build muscle. So let's talk about those things. How do you build muscle? I think by understanding how you build muscle, you can feel a lot better about this, whether or not you want to build muscle. So building muscle, also known as hypertrophy, it's a very slow and very intentional process. The owner at the first gym I worked at, he used to say, I never had a client accidentally get big or muscular. It doesn't accidentally ever happen. You're not going to do a couple of resistance training workouts and a week from now all of a sudden look muscular. That really doesn't happen. And there's a few reasons for that. And one of them is, one, because the progress is very slow with building muscle. And also because it requires a lot of very intentional things to happen. So the first one is that you need to have a caloric surplus in your nutrition, in your diet. So in other words, we are eating more calories than we're burning. But not only that, we have to be getting enough calories and protein specifically to build muscle. Protein is what is necessary in order to, one, to rebuild and to maintain the muscle we have, but also to build more. So think of it as almost like you're having to fill a cup up with water. And in order to maintain where you're at, you have to have enough protein in that cup to go all the way to the top. Well, if you want to build on top of that, you got to start pouring in more water and it's got to start to overflow. It's a very similar concept for building muscles. We got to have enough protein available in our body to repair what we're breaking down during exercise and also build more. Not only that, but building muscle also requires high training volume. I already kind of talked about this, but the type of workouts that people do to build muscle is very, very different than just regular resistance training. So, you got to kind of want to do it in order to do it. And then also talking about hormones. So there are a few hormones in our body that play a big role in building muscle. Testosterone being a really big one. Also human growth hormone, HGH, and then another one called IGF, or insulin growth factor. Basically, these muscles are what help facilitate the process and tell our body, hey, let's use these resources to build this muscle. there's only a small demographic of people who are going to just naturally have a lot of these hormones in their body to build a lot of muscle, and that's going to be mostly males from the age of 16 to 25. That's really the ideal age to just build muscle easily. But for most people, it's really hard. And there's actually one more factor that goes into building muscle, and that is having the appropriate muscle size and density. That's something that you actually don't, or excuse me, not muscle, bone size and density. That might be something that is not really well known. I don't think most people realize that. But there's been a lot of research in the last 20 years that shows that the density of your muscle, or excuse me, your bone, the density of the bone and the size of the bone determines how much muscle can actually be attached to it. In other words, if you don't have really dense bone, you're just not going to be able to build big muscle because your body knows that it can't support that much muscle safely. And the last thing you want to do is have so much muscle connected to a bone that when you contract it, it just snaps the bone, right? That would be bad. So there is a very direct correlation between bone density and the amount of muscle you're even capable of building. So for that reason, most women and most men past that prime age of muscle building, so past 25, it becomes a lot more challenging to build muscle. So not only are they having to do all these things, they're having to train that specific way, be in the caloric surplus. They're also probably having to take a lot of supplementation or to get their hormones right. And also, they got to have the right bone structure for it. If you have a very petite bone structure, it's very hard to get a big muscular look because your bones just won't handle it, and so your body won't produce it. And quite frankly, to build the muscle level to most bodybuilders, you probably are going to have to take steroids, which again is just boosting your hormones artificially. So to really drive this point home, I want to kind of talk about an example. So let's say I got a new client. Her name is Sue. She's 35 years old. She comes to me and she says, I want to become stronger and I want to lose about 20 pounds. And so I say, okay, we're going to commit to a year of working together. I'm not saying it takes a year to lose 20 pounds, but in this circumstance, it will. And we're going to commit to lifting weights. So I'm going to actually train her just like, Big Mike over here, who's 300 pounds of solid muscle. He's a bodybuilder. I'm going to pair them up in a partner group and work them out both the same way. By the way, I would never do this because that training style probably doesn't really go with her goals. Unless she wants to do it, I wouldn't. But let's say I do. And so she works out just like Big Mike. They're wearing matching tank tops in the gym. They're grunting and groaning, working chest and arms on Monday, back and arms on Tuesday, arms on Wednesday, legs on Friday. You get the picture. Let's say she trains just like that. Same method, same modality, same approach. And then we sit down and we compare her results a year from now. Well, with Big Mike, he was super happy. He gained another 5 pounds of muscle. But with Sue, she didn't. And first reason was that we made sure that her nutrition was in a good place. So she was either eating right at maintenance or eating just as many calories as it takes to burn. So if she burns 2,000 calories in a day, then she's eating 2,000. Or she's eating slightly below that number. In fact, I would want her to try to eat below that number to help make sure that she's in a deficit and help lose the weight that she's wanting to. But because she's doing that, and because she just genetically doesn't have the same bone density as Mike, and doesn't have the same hormone levels that Mike has, whether he's doing it artificially or not, as a result, she's not going to build the muscle like he did. Sometimes when you just start working or just start weightlifting, you might gain some muscle, but it is not near to the extent of what most people think. The average that people will build if they, say, work out at that intensity, so say 4 or 5 days a week consistently for a year, and you're eating in a slight surplus, you might gain 5 to 10 pounds of muscle max. And that is not as much as you think because muscle is very dense. So a pound of muscle on your body, you won't even notice. And even 5 pounds is pretty hard to notice unless it's yourself and you look very, very closely. So she may have gained a small bit of muscle after this year. Most likely not, though, because she is eating right at base or slightly below. And she also doesn't have the hormones or the bone structure to do this. Now, what she did benefit from this is that, one, she got a lot stronger. In fact, she probably got crazy strong from doing this, more than your average 35-year-old female who's been working out a year because of the style of training she was doing. So she did get stronger. She did get more control over muscles. That is a benefit of exercise resistance training, is that you increase muscle control and coordination. And then she's also going to see a small increase in bone density. Now, not to the level that she can add a ton more muscle, but she's still going to have stronger bones and ligaments in her body. That's just going to help prevent her from experiencing injury in the future. And then lastly, she's going to notice an increase in metabolism. That's just a great benefit of resistance training. Part of it might be because she slightly added a little bit of muscle, but also just because her body has become more efficient at exercise, and as a result is more efficient at burning energy, which is burning calories. So those are going to be the benefits for really anyone who does regular resistance training. Improve strength, improve coordination, increase bone density, higher metabolism. What most people aren't going to experience is a ton of muscle growth. So to answer the question, lifting weights, will it make me bulky? I'm going to say myth busted. And the reason being is it's such a small part of the puzzle that lifting weights in itself is not going to make you bulky. For most people, it's going to only really do good things. Do we have any questions about that specifically? Someone just asked, Allison asked, are juice cleanses healthy? It really depends on the one. I would say that's probably a better question for a dietitian or nutritionist. I would say that not just the caloric content. I know I really just talked about calories, but if we're talking about health and nutritional value, it's really important that you're getting all of the demands that your body needs. So again, I don't want to get too big into that because it really just depends. I would say that if your goal through a cleanse is to either lose weight or to just to be healthier, to get some of the toxins out of your body, then just switching to a better diet is going to be your best option. It might not get you as fast results as you want, but it's going to be a more lasting and better way that's going to help you long term. I don't necessarily recommend juice cleanses, but I don't know all of them, so that is a tough one. Linda asks, any advice for introducing new workouts for ages 50 or so? I don't want to give you like a specific workout. I'm a very strong believer that it really depends on where you're at currently. What I will say is that typically for just starting working out, that intensity-wise, you want to choose something that's going to be around a 5 to 7 range. And then also I would suggest lower resistance. So thinking almost more about like body weight exercises where you can focus more on the exercise yourself than worrying about pushing yourself really hard. The important thing about starting a resistance training or exercise program for the first time is trying to get form down correctly and just making sure you're doing it right. And so what I would suggest is, to be quite frank, Linda, you could probably look up online, you could find some basic workouts for someone age 50 plus, and it really comes down to more of just the intensity of it rather than worrying about the exercises themselves. As long as you're hitting your full body and you're doing it at an appropriate intensity level, you're going to get results from it. And if you ever feel like you need help with form or something like that, then I would either suggest going to an exercise class or even, here at the Rec Center, shameless shout out, we do offer free consultations where we can just sit down and work with you or just talk to you. And then for a small fee, we can do a full consultation where we can create a customized workout program for you. So I wouldn't worry too much about the specific workout itself. I worry more about the intensity level and just making sure it's a full body workout. That would be probably the most appropriate for someone who's age 50 or older who's just starting, is worry more just about choosing the right intensity. One person asks, if losing weight requires a caloric deficit, are having the goals of losing weight and gaining muscle contradictory? That's a good question. So what we see from previous research is that there's really only one way to do both simultaneously, and it's not actually happening simultaneously, it just seems that way. And it's that if we're eating right at the magic number where it's just the amount of calories that we need, if we have the hormones in place, we'll still see some muscle growth there. What I normally suggest, though, is that you probably want to choose one or the other and stick with it, because it's almost impossible to do both at the same time. What usually happens is that someone will eat without even realizing it. They'll gain some muscle early on during a workout program, And the reason being is that they're probably eating just above that minimum baseline to maintain. And what happens is, as a result, you build enough muscle and you become more effective at the exercise that you now have a higher metabolism, so that you're burning more during your workouts. And so what was a surplus, several months ago is actually now a deficit. So we'll see that weight start to go down. And it can happen on a very microscopic level. So it might be a very small amount of muscle gain that you don't necessarily see. And then your metabolism changes, and then you start to lose a little bit of fat. And it kind of goes back and forth. It's a very challenging balance. And for most people, it's really a little bit too hard to just try to intentionally do. So I try to pick one or the other and focus on that as your main goal. Christy asks, resistance training and cardio. If you do both in a workout, does it matter which one you do first? That's a good question. So not necessarily. It's going to come down more to the intensity. Thank you so much, Carly. Have a good one. I appreciate you coming. She just said she had to step out. So if you do both in a workout, does it matter which one you do first? And it comes down to intensity. And also your goals. So if your primary goal is to get better at cardio, then you would probably want to do that first. If you want to do resistance training, then you would want to do that first, assuming you've warmed up, of course. What we know is that as you go further into a workout, your fatigue increases. And so as a result, you might not be able to reach the same level of volume intensity that you would if you did it at the beginning. So I would say to try to identify what's most important to you, and if neither are, then it doesn't matter which order you do it in, as long as you make sure to just keep an eye on your own intensity level. I would say, generally speaking, if you wear yourself out by running first, it's not a good idea to go into weights, because then you're just not as in control of your body and you're more tired. And so a weight that you think you can do because you did it before, you can't do it this time because you have less energy. So I would say, if you're worried about it, do resistance training first, but it doesn't really matter. It really comes down more to fatigue and how you're feeling. If you're really tired, then you should probably dial back whatever you're doing. So if your goal is to get better at cardio, but you wait till the end of your workout, you're doing yourself a disservice, because you don't have as much energy stored to be able to do that workout, if that makes sense. Any other questions? Anything else I can help you with? If you do have some and you're typing some out, just real quick. There's one. Kevin's got one. It says, any fitness tracker devices or apps that you would recommend? Not particularly, no. What I would say, though, is that the more factors that fitness tracker takes into account, the more accurate it's going to be. So, for example, if you just hop on a treadmill and hit go and it says you're burning this many calories, that's probably not very accurate, because there's a lot of factors involved when it comes to burning calories. And so it can be, in terms of like if you're wanting to track that, the more factors it takes into, the more accurate it's going to be. I would say that in general, and this isn't a knock against fitness trackers, they're great, but they're never going to be 100% accurate. The closest thing it'll get is heart rate, and to be honest, the best heart rate trackers are actually the straps that connect to your chest, because it's right up next to your heart. Those are going to be the best for tracking heart rate. But in terms of like calories or anything else, I was just trying to pick one that takes a lot of factors into account. So most fitness trackers like Garmin, Fitbit, Apple Watch, they're all going to ask you a lot of information that's going to help calculate those numbers better. But I really can't recommend one brand or the other. I really personally don't use one much anymore, unless I'm like running. I'll use some apps on my phone for that to track distance. But that being said, they're still awesome to have. They're still fun. They help keep us involved and engaged. And even if that calorie number isn't like perfectly accurate, it still helps give you a sense of accomplishment. And you should have that, because that is a very important part of this whole process of exercising. It's feeling accomplished. And it also helps create a sense of community, because you get to compare with each other. I know a lot of departments will do like challenges and stuff like that, and that's absolutely awesome. I would just recommend trying to find one that takes a lot of factors into account. So really any of the big name brands will probably be fine in terms of just having something you can have to help track stuff. I like to use free apps myself, like MyFitnessPal. There's one called Strava that I use for running that I really like, because it's almost like social media for running. So I see what my friends do and they see what I do, and it's just a fun way to stay in touch. But I can't recommend one as far as accuracy, because there's just too many factors involved. And then I see a few more questions here from Kevin. Thoughts on pre-workout supplements and other supplements. The main thing I'll say about supplements as a whole is it's in the name there, in that it shouldn't be necessary, but it is to supplement your program. So if we're talking about nutritional supplements, I want you to think about is, can I get this nutrition from a normal diet? And if that's challenging, or if you're not able to do it, then supplements are really good. So for example, protein supplements. If you find that you struggle to get the appropriate amount of protein in your diet on a regular basis, then a protein supplement might be good for you. I know I've worked with like a few vegetarian clients and a few others that were just having a hard time getting the amount of protein they needed, so they would take a protein supplement. Or if your goal is to build muscle, then there's nothing wrong with taking a supplement to help improve that. As terms of like pre-workout, same thing. It really comes down to what you feel like you need for a workout. So with a pre-workout, there's really two main ideas there. One is that it's like caffeine. It's a stimulant. It just gets you excited. And then also it does something else with nitrous oxide, which dilates our blood vessels. There's some research to suggest that that helps with performance and all that good stuff. All I got to say is that if you like it, do it. It's not going to affect your results that much. Really, it comes down to the basics. So if you want to build muscle, making sure you're getting the protein in, making sure you're getting that caloric surplus. When it comes to performance, nutrition is going to play a big role there. So if like you eat McDonald's and then you go for a run, there's no amount of pre-workout or whatever that's going to help negate that. So I would suggest is worry most about the basics first. And then if you want to take it to the next level, pre-workouts are great for providing a little extra energy boost. Protein and creatine, those all have different things, and you're welcome to reach out after, and I can kind of get in more details with that. But supplements in general aren't necessary. So real quick, if you have any questions, feel free to email them to me. My email is cburrows@ua.edu. You can definitely find me. Big shout out to Health Promotion and Wellness. They do have some more webinars coming up, so I definitely encourage you to sign up for those. I think they already have the schedule all the way up through the end of June. Looks like a lot of good stuff on there, so I definitely encourage you to check it out. And then also a big shout out to University Recreation as well. We're still doing a lot of stuff to keep people engaged. We have a YouTube channel, and we're always posting stuff on social media. So you can just look us up on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. It's just UA Recreation. And if you look that up, you should be able to find us. We're doing some videos. I've got a few workouts on there that you can look up. And if you're not sure where to start, you could look at one of those, and that'd be a good place to start. It's just trying to keep up and follow one of those workouts. That'd be a good place to start. All right, so thank you so much, everyone. Again, I'm a big believer that knowledge is power, so I love giving as much information, education as I can. So I'll hang around if you got questions, or if you want to shoot me an email, give me a call sometime. More than welcome to do that. I hope we were able to dispel a few myths, and we might need to do another one of these, because I've got a whole nother list of myths that we can talk about on a different day. So we'll see, maybe look at feedback, something like that. So again, I will hang out just a little bit more in case we got more questions. Otherwise, thank you so much for coming. Have a wonderful day. Try to stay active and healthy. I know when you're stuck at home, it can be hard to focus on those kinds of things. But we also have a lot of time, right? So shouldn't be too many excuses keeping us back. All right, thanks, Kathy. Thanks, Christy. Y'all have a great day. So you stay safe as well. All right, have a great day, guys.